Hello Jason, it's Friday, May 23rd, and I want to start off today with a bit of news. As it turns out, I'm once again gainfully employed. The plus side of which is, I no longer have to live on credit. The negative side of which is, I have a significantly smaller amount of time to work with for making these videos and performing in challenges. Now, in your last video, you lamented the fact that you were so overworked that you weren't able to record a video for that night. And while your extremely busy period has now passed, this has brought up the opportunity for me to suggest that maybe rather than doing a video every weekday, we just each do one video each week. That way, rather than each doing 2 or 3 somewhat rushed 3 to 5 minute videos a week, we could focus on doing one video that's significantly longer. Anyway, it's just an idea for now, but considering the fact that my work schedule has me working 42.5 hours next week, I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to get all of my videos done. Now for the matter at hand. Today is Badass Mother Friday, and I'm going to give you a double dose, which, side note, if I were speaking Spanish would mean a double 2, so 4, but actually only 2, of Badass Mother Friday. Starting with the person who, quite frankly, inspired me to suggest Badass Mother Fridays in the first place, Neil deGrasse Tyson. For anyone who hasn't taken my advice and started watching Cosmos, Neil deGrasse Tyson is an astrophysicist and general science enthusiast. In fact, from a personal perspective, he's inspirational for his passion towards science and understanding the universe, but he's so much more than that. As a general trend, I like to pick people who are exceptional but need to perform a specific activity in order to become noted as badass. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is badass because of his commitment to science education, particularly as it comes to legislation. But first, a little background and perhaps some insight into what made Neil deGrasse Tyson what he is today. When he was 10 years old, mankind did something that we had never done before. We set foot on a foreign world. In the late 60s and early 70s, science education was pretty much the best thing that anyone could ever dream to do. Because at that point in time, anything seemed possible if you were committed to understanding the way that the world worked and manipulating it to your desires. Unfortunately, generations later, this passion for science seems to be sadly lacking in the world at large. A fact which, in a clip which I'll link down below, Neil deGrasse Tyson points out eloquently and, quite frankly, laments. So the reason that he's a badass, aside from inspiring Badass Mother Fridays in the first place, is because he questions the way that we prioritize money, wealth, and economic growth over science and pushing towards a better future. But enough about the future. Our next badass comes from a distant place called the past. To be specific, he was born in the year 1415 to 1417, we're not really sure because records weren't really kept that well back then, in Warwickshire, England. From what records we can find, he grew up in a rich, politically active family in Warwickshire and was made a knight before 1441. But he wasn't famous for his knightly deeds, no, not at all. In fact, he was famous for being repeatedly arrested. I'm talking, of course, about Sir Thomas Malory, the author of this book, Le Mode d'Arthur. But of course, old-timey Middle English writers aren't badass just because they're old-timey Middle English writers. He'd have to do something pretty cool to get that famous, right? And boy did he. This may actually be the first badass on my list that is badass for potentially negative reasons. But before I get into any of that, a little bit of context because it'll become important later on. He lived during a time called the War of the Roses, when the Plantagenet kings of England were fighting against the Lancastrians and the people of York. Both sides asserted that they had a claim to the throne of England and sought control over the country as a whole, which may become important when you learn that Sir Thomas Malory sided with the Lancasters on this. And so when I give you a list of the crimes which he allegedly committed, take them with a grain of salt. They may have been potentially trumped up, but they're still badass. So let's go through the list. In 1451, he was recorded as being arrested for the attempted murder of the Duke of Buckingham by ambush with 26 other men, extortion of money from 2 monks, robbery with 10 accomplices of £46 in money and £40 worth of ornaments from Combe Abbey, extortion of money from another monk, further robbery at Combe Abbey with 100 accomplices of £40 in money and 5 rings, a small psalter, 2 silver bells, 3 rosaries, and 2 bows and 3 sheaves of arrows. Theft of 7 cows, 2 calves, and 335 sheep. So far, this list of crimes seems somewhat mundane, except for that part about the 335 sheeps. That's pretty crazy. But where he's really badass is in this crime. He was charged with escaping imprisonment at the house of Sheriff Sir William Montfort at Coleshill, Warwickshire. And then it says in brackets, Mallory comes and goes, swims the moat at night. And so, despite his crimes, he was pretty much free to come and go from the prison because he knew how to swim. Something which he did often, because the majority of the book that I just showed you was thought to have been written while he was in prison. Which is also kind of badass, because he wrote a scalding book about the lineage of kings while there was a war going on over the lineage of kings. And so, if nothing else, he provides a lot of entertainment, and that is badass. And now, onto Battleship. I agree that things aren't really looking too great for your side, especially when I tell you that your last shot was a miss. And now, rather than building a pattern where I leave only one space between each of my shots, I can double that and leave 2 spaces because I don't have to search for your spy ship anymore. So I'm going to start off this newfound search by attacking F9.